Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be picking up right where we left off on the last video, which was midway through me playing some local spots. For anyone new watching, you should check out my last video. It explains what I'm doing and lays the base work for what you're about to see today. If you don't want to do that, I will link a video in the description which describes the counting system I use, as well as some basic info about blackjack and why it's beatable. So, without further ado, let's get right into some casino action. Once again, I will be using the high-low count system, and I'll be playing a hit 17 game with 6 deck and 8 decks. Now this first spot is usually not one of my go-tos, as it is an 8 deck game with poor cut and is usually quite busy, meaning the game has low value. My session here was just under an hour, and I was lucky enough to catch some high counts and good variance despite it being a low EV game. Once again, I'll be doing a minimum bet of 25, up to 2 hands of 1,000 when the count is true 6 or higher. My bet spread is on screen, and I'll be narrating the play along with the current count so you can see these bets in action. So I moseyed on over to the high limit room, found the table I wanted. It did have another player at it, but luckily he left at the shuffle, and I was able to get the table to myself for a bit. So I bought in and started playing minimum bets until the count went up. I want to just take a second to thank everyone for your engagement with the last video. It was awesome to see how many people enjoyed it and the different feedback I got on it, so please keep that up guys. It's awesome to see, and I love making these videos, so I promise there will be more. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more casino content like this. So sadly, having the table to myself was short-lived. I played through an entire 8 deck shoe in the negative, and right at the beginning of the next game I had some other player join me. So I was no longer playing heads up, which is okay, but it does negatively affect my rounds per hour, so it's never ideal. Regardless of that, the count did go up, so I put out $100 as the count was a true 1. And as you can see here on the first $100 bet, I was dealt a 12 versus dealer 5. They drew to a bust, so it was a win for me. The count remained at true 1 for the next hand, so I left that $100 bet out. I was dealt a 10 versus dealer's 10. Drew an ace, so I had 21, which obviously I stood on. Definitely can't complain about that. The dealer drew to 22, so it was a bust and a table win for everyone. Once again, the count stayed at true 1, so I left that $100 bet out along with a $5 tip for the dealer. The way I do my tipping is I usually won't exceed more than 5% of the game's hourly expected value. So this game I'm playing right now is about $200 an hour, which means I wouldn't be tipping more than about $10 an hour. You see here I was dealt a 20, dealer drew to a bust, so it was another win for me. Into the next hand we have another true 1. I was dealt a 14 versus a 5, which is a stay. I stood and dealer busted again, meaning another win for me. Now I'm just going to fast forward a bit ahead here. The count stays at a true 1, and I ended up losing 1, surrendered the other, and we also had another player join the game, so that brought my rounds per hour down even more. Even though the footage is sped up, you can still see how long it takes to go through the table once there's 3 or 4 players, or even more. It's a big hit on the rounds per hour and makes the game worth a lot less compared to if I'm playing alone. Either way, you can never leave the table in a positive count, and I had no better tables to go to, so I was camped out here for the time being. So finally we got into some action here. Once again it was true 1, so I had my $100 bet out. I was dealt a pair of aces versus a dealer's 3. Aces always split regardless of what the dealer's showing. And I was dealt a 15 and a 20, had to stay on them, and the dealer drew to 18, so I had 1 win and the other was a loss. Immediately following that, the count raised up to a true 2, so since I was playing with other players, I put my 2 hands of 200 out. I was dealt an 8 and a 17. I hit the 8 and was dealt a 10, so I had 18 and 17 versus a dealer 10. Dealer drew an 8, so I pushed 1 hand and lost the other. But that's no worries at all, because the count had now risen to a true 3, meaning 2 hands of 300. I was dealt a 14 and a soft 14 versus a dealer 6. The first 14 was a stand, but the soft 14 was a great double opportunity. At this point I was low on chips, so I needed to buy in another $300 to fund this double. I was dealt another ace, bringing my total to 15, which I was stuck with. Thankfully, the dealer drew to 24, meaning I won both my hands, and it was a nice $900 upswing. On the next hand, the count dropped down to a true 2, so I put out my two hands of 200. I was dealt a 20 and a 17 versus a dealer's ace. The insurance bet wasn't there as it was a true 2, so I just stood on both of them, and luckily the dealer drew to a bust, so it was another win for me. The count stayed at true 2 for the next hand, so again the 2x200 stayed out. I was dealt an 18 and a 12 versus a dealer 7. I stood the 18 and I hit the 12 all the way into a bust, so I lost that one. The dealer ended up drawing to 20, so I also lost my first hand. Coming into this next hand, it was again a true 2, so I had my two hands of 200 out. I was dealt 11 and 19 versus a dealer 10. I stood the 19, but of course I doubled the 11 and sadly got 4 for a total of 15. Never feels good, and the dealer ended up flipping an 8, so I won that one hand that had a 19, but I lost the double. The $200 bet stayed out for this next hand, and I was dealt a 12 and a 19 versus dealer's 3. Normally a 12 will hit versus a 3, but when the count is true 2 or higher, it will stand. So I stood both my hands, and the dealer ended up drawing to 25, and they both paid out. Same bets again, I was dealt a 12 and a 16 versus dealer's ace. I tried to surrender my 16 versus ace, but forgot that they don't allow that in Canadian casinos, so I was out of luck. I hit the 12 into a bust, but luckily drew a 4 on my 16 for a total of 20. 16 will actually stand against ace when the count is 3 or higher, but it wasn't there yet, so I had to take a card. The dealer ended up flipping an 8 for a total of 19, and my second hand ended up being a win. The true count of 2 is still hanging on, so once again, same bets, I was dealt an 11 and a 17 versus dealer's 2. The doubles were just not going my way today because when I doubled my 11, I got an ace, which is the worst card I could have got, bringing my total to 12. I stood the 17 and luckily the dealer drew to 24, so it saved my crappy double and both bets were paid. And finally, the last hand of true 2. The $200 bets were out and I was dealt a 9 and a 16 versus dealer's 5. Continuing my streak of poor doubles, my 9 was given a 4 for a total of 13, which I was stuck with. I stood my 17 and the dealer drew to 25, once again saving my less than stellar double. Now we can see the true count has risen to 5 as I have my two hands of 800 out. Sadly, I was dealt a 14 and a 12 versus dealer's 10. I surrendered the 14 and I turned my 12 into 22 for a bust. I traded in some of my green chips for black as the true count was still 5 and I didn't want to bet $800 in greens. We got some redemption on this next hand. I was dealt a blackjack and a 14 versus dealer's 6. The blackjack paid $1,200, which was nice, and I stood the 14 of course. Dealer ended up drawing to 26 and my second hand was paid out as well. This was the last hand of the shoe and I decided to just get out of there. The pit boss had been watching me play for like 20 minutes. Like I've said before, this is a local spot for me and I always try to leave before they approach me about my play. So I colored up and headed to the cashier. This next place I'm going to go to is in a different city on a different day, but it should fill in the rest of the video nicely. This place is a 6-deck game and usually quite busy. This session is going to show you guys the other side of card counting, the poor variance. Because the edge is so small, even in high count, it's very easy to lose your large bets. This place is very sweaty, I've only played here once before and they sniffed me out in about a half hour, so I'm not expecting much. There was a couple players on the table when I arrived and they were halfway through their game, so I just let them finish up before I joined in. So it took a while for the count to go up. I played through almost 2 full shoes before we finally got to a true 2. We did have a couple true 1s before this, but I'm not going to bother showing them. But anyways, you'll see here I got dealt 14 and 18 versus dealer's 9. I hit the 14 and got a 5 for a total of 19, and I stood the 18. Dealer flipped a 10 for 19, which means I pushed one and lost the other. After that it was down to true 1. I got dealt a pair of 9s versus dealer's 3. I split and got 2 8s, so I had 2 hands of 17. They weren't enough though, as the dealer flipped an 8 and then a 10 for 21, so I lost them both. After those few hands, the count was back down to true 0 or lower for the rest of the shoe. So after that shoe, I ended up playing a whole shoe in the negative, and then one of the players ended up leaving, so that's good because it increases rounds per hour like we've talked about, and early on into the next shoe after that, the count started to go up again. As you can see on screen, it was a true 1, so I had my $100 out. I got a 10, doubled it against a dealer 4, got a 5 for 15, and the dealer ended up drawing a 17, so this one was a loss for me. And now the count had gone up to true 2, so I put out my 2 hands of 200. I was dealt 2 15s versus a dealer's 2, stood both, and dealer ended up drawing to 17, which means I lost both. You see here I had to buy in for some more chips because I had ran out, and true count must have raised to 4 because I put out 2 hands of 500. I was dealt a 17 and a 14 versus dealer's 10. I surrendered the 14 and stood the 17. Unfortunately, the dealer flipped an ace for a blackjack and I was out of chips again. Time to buy in for some more. Another 2 hands of 500 went out and I was dealt a 20 and a soft 18 versus dealer's 10. I hit my soft 18 and got a 9, bringing it down to a 17. The dealer pulled a 10 for a total of 20, meaning I lost one hand and pushed the other. The count had now dropped to a true 3. I only had 500 in chips in front of me, so I bought in for another 100 and put out my 2 hands of 300. I was dealt a 17 and a 15 versus dealer's 10. Of course I surrendered the 15, stood the 17, and dealer drew a 19, so it was another loss for me. Which again meant more buying in, so I bought in for 400 and put out 2 hands of 200, as the count must have dropped to a true 2. I was dealt a 5 and a 13 versus dealer's 5. I turned my 5 into a 21, which was nice, and stood the 13. However, all that hard work was for nothing because the dealer flipped a 10 and a 6 for 21, meaning I lost one hand and pushed the other. Once again, I was pulling out cash. Like I said guys, this was a rough session and there was still more to come. This is the other side of card counting and you're not going to win every bet, so you do need to be prepared for things like this in your card counting career. The true count was back to 4, so I put out the 2 hands of 500. I was dealt a 14 and a 12 versus an 8. I turned both of them into 22s, meaning this was another L for me. This is why you need to have a plan as an advantage player. Just knowing how to count isn't enough. Know your bankroll and generate a bet spread that allows you to play with a low risk of ruin. It's surprising how often you can lose even though you have the advantage, and it's very possible to go through long losing streaks. Advantage play is about the long term. You can easily lose for tens or even hundreds of hours, and you need to have the bankroll to survive those swings. You can see we have another 2 hands of 500 going out. I was dealt a 17 and 14 versus dealer's 10. I surrendered the 14 and stood the 17. Once again, the dealer flipped a 10 and I lost my first hand as well. It's a good thing I have deep pockets because I was buying in again. You can see I settled on a true 3.5 because I put out 2 hands of 400, which means the count was probably borderline just about true 4 but not actually there, so I did a bet that was about halfway. I was dealt a 6 and a 10 versus dealer's 6, so I was pulling out more cash to double the 10. I turned the 6 into a 12, and when I doubled the 10 I ended up getting a 2. So I had 2 12s against a 6, and dealer ended up drawing to 19. Another loss. So now it was time to buy in again. After this buy-in, I was down about 9,000 in the session, so it never feels good, but it is part of the numbers, and the short term is unpredictable, so things like this happen all the time. Now those of you who follow me on Instagram have already seen this clip, but it's pretty funny what the pit boss comes over and says after this.
Interesting way to play.
What's that?
25, 25, 10,000, 1,000. Your card counter? I'm checking now, so save me time.
Obviously not.
Why is that? Because you're losing? Card counters don't always win.
Yeah, well,
But we'll find out.
yeah, we'll see.
So yeah, you can see he straight up just accused me of being a card counter. I'm actually quite surprised he even let me play this next hand, because usually once they're suspicious of it, they'll stop the play and they'll hold the play until they can make a decision, and then they'll usually boot you. so I was happy to get this last hand in because it did end up working out in my favor. As the pit boss mentioned, you can see I raised my bets to 2 by 1,000, which means that the count was now a true 6 or higher. I was dealt a soft 18 and a 10 versus dealer 7. I stood the soft 18 and doubled the 10, which was dealt an 8, so I had 2 18s versus a dealer 7. Luckily, variance was finally on my side for this, and the dealer flipped a 10 for 17, meaning both bets won, and I was able to make 3,000 back that I had given the casino earlier on this session. By now, it was quite obvious that my business wasn't welcome at this casino, so I decided to color up and get out of there before they asked any more questions, and hopefully not have to show ID at the cage. So luckily there was no ID check at the cage, and my identity remains a mystery to them. That was a losing session, which happens about 48% of the time, but it does feel good to make some of it back at the end there. That's all I got for you guys today. Once again, thank you everyone for your support on the last video. It really means a ton and is a lot of motivation to keep the content coming. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave some feedback in the comments section. I'll have another video for you guys next week, so hit the bell if you want to be notified when that happens. I also want to mention, check me out on Instagram if you haven't already at QuatroAP. I'm trying to up my Reels game and post there a few times per week. If you guys are interested in fast tracking your AP learning journey, check out our school. Link will be in the description. Thanks for joining me today. Quatro out.